just want to talk about one particular plant. It's my favourite ivy, and it's a flowering stem from my favourite ivy, and this is it, and it's called Hedera sulphur. And what I'm going to do with this one, this is ideal cutting material, and you can still make cuttings from ivy at this time of the year. I cut below a leaf node, and I'm just going to wound that on the opposite side to the node. You just take a piece of bark off, and that will make me a cutting. But because this is a flowering stem, that will not climb. It'd be an ivy shrub, in other words.
Hello and happy new year from Talking Dirty. It's time to go behind the scenes again and find out what's going on at East Ruston Old Vicarage on the Norfolk coast, this time in January 2025. Over at aforementioned garden, looking, well, becheckered and wonderful, and his fabulous, very designer-looking glasses, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and extremely handsome horticulturalist.
And on this lovely day, part cloud, part sun, over in Cambridgeshire, we have Thordis Maria Sophia Fredrickson, looking absolutely... Oh, you always shine a light. You've got such a happy demeanour, I think. That's what it is.
Well, I've got antenna today. I had my hair cut, and now it doesn't know what to do with itself. So I've got like little plumes sticking out the top of my head and an asparagus fern as well. So it's a good look over on my screen.
I thought that was highly intentional and very on trend.
Apologies for my laggy camera as well. I'm trying to get a new one, but it hasn't turned up yet. So we just have to bear with. But hey, we're here to talk about plants. Who cares whether my webcam is laggy? And it's been a really interesting time over the last few days when we're recording. Hopefully I'll turn it around fairly quickly, so it will still be in recent memory, but really cold, even for you, Alan.
Yes, I mean, we've had unprecedented frosts in this garden here. But, through it all, and I think we mentioned this the other day, but through it all, there's been one little fuchsia that's still been flowering away through all the snow and the hail and the ice and the frost that we've had. And that was Fuchsia Lottie Hobby. And it's still got a few flowers on even now. And I just think that, that fuchsia is advertised as a half-hardy variety. Well, it's been outside in the garden here for years. But there's hardiness and hardiness. And I would say that nowadays it could be regarded as hardy, especially as it's been through some quite severe frosts, so -2, -3 here. We haven't been as badly off as some people with this horrible weather. We didn't get -6 or 7s, 8s and 9s and 10s, not anything like that. But I think that it actually encourages us to be a little bit more experimental. And I'm often going around the garden. I'm always trying to sort of think of improving the amount of plants that I have, the variety of plants that I have. I just want to talk something about a little bit about a nursery here. It's fairly local to us in East Anglia because it's Potterton's of Lincolnshire. And I was going through here today and I looked and I saw a lovely little cyclamineus narcissi, the ones with the swept back petals and the tubular trumpet with a little frilly edge. And I saw a variety called Englander that had been raised from seed by Potterton's nursery, his father. And I just thought, well, how wonderful is that? And this is the value of being able to buy plants, I think, from smaller nurseries like this. And the fact is that they're never going to get rich because they can't possibly, because, they charge such little money for their bulbs and things. But it is rather wonderful to have that, I think. So they've gone on the order. Now, I'm not going to get them obviously until late next year, but or late this year now, but they'll be planted for next year.
There was a really hopeful article in Gardens Illustrated about how, the headline being a lot of specialist nurseries have been closing. We've lost lots of treasured nurseries. But the hopeful thing being that there are the likes of Ben Preston with Cliffbank and Stephen Liu with No Name, who've obviously featured on this podcast, and loads more besides. Wonderful, new, vibrant nurseries that hopefully will stand the test of time and be there for decades, so devoted to these wonderful little plants that you just don't get in a garden centre or a really big plant cellar.
Yeah, and these are the things that make your garden bit more interesting than the norm, if you like, being able to buy these plants. And so I'm quite thrilled at having nurseries like this, and I'm quite happy to support them. And there's another little crocus that in here that I don't know at all. It's Crocus sieberi, Ronald Ginns, and it's his favourite. So I've got to try that, haven't I? He says it grows well, it's a good doer. If it doesn't do for me, I'm going to think, what the heck am I doing wrong?
Well, it's
But I got
also for those of us who like to be able to justify plant purchases, supporting nurseries, keeping these plants going,
yeah.
all of that. It's a good way for us to be able to tell ourselves we're doing a thing that isn't just for us.
No, it isn't just for us because, well, it's not in my case because, lots of the plants that I get that are unusual, I'm able to propagate them and perhaps offer them to the visitors here when they come and to see us. So, it kind of goes round and round and round. I think when we have the kind of weather that we've just had, it brings home to you the value of a sheltered spot in the garden. And I'm thinking that because this is growing outside in the garden. I've just picked this just before we came on air. It's a lemon, obviously, and it's been outside now for about 6, 7 years, I suppose. It's growing hard up against the wall of my kitchen, and it's planted in a copper. And as you can see, I've got lovely lemons on it. The foliage is fine at the moment. It's a little bit yellowing, but it was that before we had the frost, so I'm not concerned about that. Um, but I think that is just enough shelter to keep it growing. And this an ordinary, but not so ordinary, really, I suppose, a very friendly florist cyclamen. Well, I had it inside the house and it was looking decidedly, "Phew, I'm too hot, It was telling me I'm too hot, get me out of here." And so I put it outside the back door and it's sitting on an upturned flower pot outside the back door. And it's been there through all the cold, frosty weather that we've had. And you can see it's still flowering away and still quite happy. Whether it will last or not, I don't know.
You
And
know, one of
whilst
the
outside,
things
I thought, well, I'll just have a look at this little thing here, which is Solanum Crèche du Pape. It's all white at the moment. It hasn't got any of the blue shading on it. But I mean, still a few flowers on that. And then you look around and you see various other plants that have got flowers on. This lovely little pot here, which is Narcissus Cedric Morris. And Cedric Morris found that in the Pyrenees some time ago. And I don't think they've ever found the exact spot where it was growing because I think there was an awful lot of road widening schemes and all the rest of it going on in Spain at the time. And so here we are, we have it. And for us, it's doing very well. Ian keeps splitting it. And we divide half the clumps every year and we grow them in terracotta pots. And I think that's the key to its success because if you think about where it comes from, the Pyrenees, it might be cold and frosty in the winter with a bit of snow, depending on how high you go. But in actual fact, in the summer, it gets a thorough baking. And if they're in a terracotta pot, and if they're in a greenhouse or in a sheltered place outside, they're going to get that thorough baking as well. So I think that suits it.
It's interesting with the cold weather. I think it's a real opportunity because you can immediately see which parts of your garden, say you move to a new garden or you're kind of a newer gardener like me, you can so analyze which bits are harder frost, which bits have
Yeah.
got that protection. And actually, I was up at Monksilver talking to Joe Sharman, recording something for the radio the other week. And we were talking about how certainly if you've got his level of knowledge, at what temperature certain plants do that sort of limp, flagging, sad thing that
Yeah.
certainly newbie gardeners think, oh no, my hellebore has died. But obviously it's
Yeah.
just reacting to the cold. But the actual exact temperature at which a hellebore will do that, all these various plants, I've not got that knowledge yet, but certainly the weather can tell you, going out and looking at your garden after a hard frost can tell you loads.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the first time I saw cyclamen coum hanging its head flat on the ground, arums do it as well. Lots of plants do that. In actual fact, what they're doing is when they get to a certain temperature, they drain themselves of moisture as if they're wilting, and that stops the cells bursting if it's frozen. I mean, it's quite easy when you think about it. It's
Yeah,
it's
so
quite
clever.
fascinating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, you do learn. And I mean, the other thing I talk about learning something. I picked this camellia in bud. And I want to get it fairly close to the screen because I want you to see that through the calyx there, it's a white flowered variety. Yeah, through the calyx, you can just see the color of the flower showing. Now, when they're at that stage, if you've got them in the garden and you want to pick two or three just to put in a little vase, pick them, take the lower leaves off, put them in a warmish room, and within 3 days they will open. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? I mean, who needs to go and buy expensive flowers when, not that I'm trying to do the florist trade out of any business, but I'm trying to save a bit of money. But when you've got a mature bush like this, And this particular white flowered variety, I'll tell you a tale about it. It's fascinating really because it opens its flowers. It's never had the sun on it at all, but the flowers always go brown around the edges, and it annoys me. I go past it daily when it's flowering and when it's not, and so I cut it to the ground. And it's shot from the ground and it's come back and it's still got flower buds on. And now this is how I use this one. I cut the flower buds off just as they're showing colour. And I give them away to people or put them in the house just so that I can see them. And then when they open in the house, they are pristine and they don't have that horrid brown edge, which it always seems to get. And yet it doesn't have any sun on it. So the reason for that, I can't tell you, whether it's too dry an atmosphere or what, I don't know. But there we are. I use it anyway. But I mean, if you look at those leaves, I know I'm often banging on about how important shiny leaves are in the garden, but just look at the shine on those leaves, and it's completely natural. I haven't done anything to it. Those leaves are dark green, they're shiny, they're light reflecting, and they're cheerful. And that's what you want during the winter, something shiny and cheerful to cheer you up like a sack of money.
We were we were we were lucky to be on the radio with Ian Roof, who is a beloved friend of ours and who features on this podcast, or certainly has done. He's so flippin' busy, particularly now. It's so hard to find time to record at all. Never mind with Ian, but he. Brought show and tell for the radio. So obviously we could describe it, we could talk about the varieties, but Alan and I were the only people lucky enough to see it because we were all Zooming for the
Yeah,
radio. And what an amazing sprig he brought along
he did.
with osmanthus in there, a really fabulous holly. I just wanted all of them. And he was talking about this idea of a garden. You don't want it to be too samey. You don't want it to be completely overrun with evergreens so that there's no seasonal shift. But actually, you can get away with so many of these plants because at this time of year, they're invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. You see, I mean, if you've got a garden and you've got a few evergreens in it, you don't want too many evergreens or too many deciduous plants. But if you've got a nice mixture, as the leaves fall in the autumn on your shrubs and they become skeletal, the evergreen varieties shine through. And it is important to think about. I mean, think about shiny leaves. Think about the color of a green leaf, for instance. The shrub Griselinia littoralis. It has the most amazing soapy textured leaves, but they're a bright apple green. They're cheerful green. I mean, if you think about yew growing in a churchyard, it's always kind of mournful, isn't it? Very dark and somber and all the rest of it. But if you've got variegated yew, I mean, it looks as if the sun's shining on it. So there's the difference, really. Um, Golden yew looks absolutely fabulous in the sun, I think. I mean, I'm going around the garden on a continual basis. I've said this and I'll say it till I die, probably. And we're trying to improve the varieties that we have. And they're not necessarily new varieties. I mean, it could be a variety from years ago that has better qualities than the modern plants that are selling today. But there are always new plants coming along, and there's new plants coming into your mind and your vision and how you're going to use them and everything else. Yeah, so I mean, it is a continuous thing. But I got to the stage now where I have to actually think if I'm going to bring a new plant into the garden, I've got to dig something up. Now, what's going to happen to that plant? Well, I usually give it away to somebody. There's plenty of people here who are working in the garden who will come and say, "Oh, yes, I'll have that," And it's always very nice that the incentive is there when it's free, isn't it?
Oh, I love something free. It is also for those of us who hanker after the 32 acres, it's good to know even at 32 acres, you have to look around and think, what am I going to dig up to put this new plant in?
Well, yes. I mean, I got the reason I got Potterton's catalogue here is because they really are sort of their nursery specializes in alpine plants as well as ordinary garden plants. And what we've done in the sunk garden here, where we had a very narrow border along the top level, and that's closest to the inside of the garden. We had some standard roses in there, and they were knocked this way and that, and all the diseases that roses are prone to were there. And it just looked it got neglected, probably because I planted Lathyrus grandiflorus, which is a perennial pea, and the perennial pea just doesn't know when to stop growing. So, be wary of where you put it if you plant it in the garden. It's absolutely wonderful thing because it has two-tone flowers, purple and a sort of maroon flowers. Early summer, quite a long period, about 4 weeks, I suppose, but it does run and it is a rampant thing. So, if you've got somewhere in turf or something like that or a wildflower meadow, then plant a little bit of it and see what happens. And that's what I'm going to do with some of the bits I've dug up because I mean, it's just been going absolutely mad here. So I'm going to devote that to smaller growing plants. And I thought initially, because it's in the sunken garden, the scent is going to get trapped. So I've got quite a few dianthus are going in there. Dianthus have to have a scent for me. And I mean, there's the wonderful Mrs Sinkins, which flowers once and then is gone, but the scent is unforgettable and all the more precious for that, probably. And she has a pink flowered form as well, if you can get it. And I went past an ordinary tray of dianthus in a local nursery, and I thought, oh, that's a stunning scent. And I found the variety that it belonged to, and so I bought it. And I don't know, I paid about £8 for it, I think, something like that. And I brought it home and I enjoyed it. I put it into a larger pot with lots of lovely gritty compost. And I had it on a stand outside my potting shed and I deadheaded it regularly and it kept flowering and flowering. It's a single pink with a ruffled edge and a circular maroon ring in the middle of it. And I suppose it got to about September and I was taking cuttings and I thought, why not take cuttings of you? I'm going to do this. And so I took a tray of cuttings. So I've now got 12 little plants, all rooted and ready to go. And, it's daft, isn't it, really? And so I thought to pep up the interest in that border, which is going to have small things in it. And I've got to be strict about that, but they have to be smallish things. And it's an on your knees job for weeding as well. Uh, and I thought, well, Mr. Potterton will help me, as will Darcy and Everest, who are not far away from us as well. I mean, they grow wonderful alpine plants and interesting varieties too.
Yeah, and what an exciting prospect to have somewhere to plant those little treasures, because so often a lot of us fall in love with those and then you try to find a little place for them and they just almost inevitably something lollops over them, something
Yeah,
crowds
get
them
swamped.
out. It's really hard to put them in a treasured spot unless you have that
Yeah.
particular sink or whatever. Even then, I mean, because if you're not weeding all the time, it's very easy for a little treasure in a sink to have some weedy thing grow next to it. So yeah, it's how exciting. I'm quite jealous, very jealous.
So wish me luck with that one. Yeah. Anyway, so that's on the and lots of these small bulbs and things, they often require really to be safe and sound cold greenhouse treatment. And we're very lucky in the fact that we've just had one of our greenhouses renewed. We had already had the wooden base, and the wooden base is probably a metre tall at least. And we dealt with somebody called Woodpecker Joinery, which are based near Birmingham somewhere, I think. Anyway, so Graham did all our measurements and what we wanted and designed it. And I mean, the brick base has a porch on it. So you can see it's got to be bespoke, in other words. And so these emails flew back and forth, as to what do you want with this? What would you like this? Do it. How would you like that? And I mean, we've got a cedar wood greenhouse and it's got aluminium protection on top of wherever it needs it, and goodness knows what. I mean, it's quite a pucker job actually. And the other day when they came, they've been here 2 days erecting it, and they've gone now. And they came, and Graham said to them, "Oh, well, it looks very nice. Thank you very much." And he said, "Would you like a little plaque to say that this greenhouse is by appointment to His Majesty the King?" And Grant said, "Well, no, I wouldn't." And I said, "Well, it might be nice if they really are." And yes, they are. Woodpecker joinery. And so, I mean, it's a bit like a plant having an AGM, isn't it? It means award of garden merit. If it's good enough for the king, come on. It's good enough for us as well.
What I
And that
thought,
is,
though, my immediate thought was the pressure. I know Graham's good at these things, but having to send all those measurements off, and it's
yeah,
all
yeah,
got to
well,
be precise.
absolutely. I mean, you can't do it unless you're a nutter or you're very mathematically insane, and he probably is. Anyway, we've got that greenhouse, and that is the greenhouse that I use for tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers, and the odd silly thing. We always try and grow something new, whether it's good to eat or not, but we try. Anyway, at the end of the season, all that gets taken away, and then we put pot plants in there. And over the winter, it would have pots like Sir Cedric Morris would be in there, you see, and just that little bit shelter of cold glass would bring them on so that they flower much earlier than perhaps they normally do. And it also gives us a space if you're in your garden and you've got an empty greenhouse. I think this is a lovely thing to do. You can grow the bulbs on, providing you look after them and dry them off when they're finished. They will bulk up, and you can have more and more. And you really haven't got the expense of heat, which is a costly thing today. But it doesn't mean that when your greenhouse is in the winter, it's without flowers, it can be full of different things all coming along. And the scent from some of these early flowering narcissus is absolutely amazing. And other plants I can think of to go into cold greenhouses are Primula auriculas. I mean, who doesn't love an auricula? I mean, just look, even a pot of Primula acaulis, our native primrose, will amaze you with the scent that you get from it. You can smell it outside on a warm spring day, but you don't smell it as much as you would in the enclosed space of a lovely greenhouse. So I would say to anybody who's thinking about maybe rejuvenating a greenhouse, do get in touch with Woodpecker Joinery because they build to your specifications on your base. So you haven't got to start from scratch. So if you've got a rickety old greenhouse on an existing base, there you are, solution.
I'm always so jealous of your glass because obviously, I mean, I did have briefly had a greenhouse and then it blew away because I put it at the allotment where it was almost inevitable. I got a full refund though because it was so terrible, that particular greenhouse, that they actually gave me money back. So that was fine. But
Well,
it
that's
does
good.
mean I don't have anywhere to put precious things. We all know that I've pretty much given up on keeping anything precious until I have more time and space and all of that. But I have one aeonium that survived the terrible winter a couple of years ago, and I put it in a shed and I'd covered it with fleece. Everything else died, and it survived. And so it's in my hall in the dark in my front hall because it's kind of the coldest, most out of the way place. And every time someone comes in the front door, or you get the milk in or whatever, I have to sort of shunt this aeonium out of the. And
That's
soon, hopefully, it'll go
perseverance
back
for
out.
you, I think. I
But
think
for
you
those
have to
of
be
you listening who
congratulated.
don't have all the fabulous glass or whatever, and who are currently got one or two precious things tucked away on windowsills, in downstairs loos, wherever it might be, that's just a bit out of the way, I'm there with you.
Well, we did this year put all our cactus and aeoniums that are on the stand outside the offices here. We did put them in a greenhouse that is heated. And I think, thank goodness that we did, because some of them are quite old and quite large now. And I think, I mean, that they could have been in peril in this weather that we've just had over the past week. Um, but they will shortly be moved out as soon as we get to the stage where I think, oh, are we going to have frost again? I mean, serious frost again. We don't know because our weather's kind of upside down, topsy-turvy, call it what you will. I mean, look at the recent fires in Los Angeles. That is horrid. And it does make you think of sort of famine and floods and all the things that are spoken about in the Holy Bible, doesn't it?
Well,
Um,
also as a gardener, like you always say, you want to test. If you've got an air and a spare, you want to test things. But I went too wholehearted with testing. I need to really stop and spend a long time thinking about whether I am actually happy to lose things before I test them again. But actually, also, it's about buying stuff. But until I have more spaces to overwinter things, I do definitely need to stop myself from getting sucked into the buying of them in the first place. A bit like the tiny, delicate alpine things. If you haven't got a place to home them, I'm trying to have more self-restraint.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly sensible. It really is perfectly sensible. I mean, there's no point in buying something and knowing that it's going to die unless it's an annual and you're prepared for that, or unless you're prepared to pay the price and just have that plant for one season. I mean, sometimes some of the plants that I grow under glass, they get so unwieldy, big and unwieldy, and just too much to keep wheeling in and out. And so we take an air and a spare from them and grow those on. And then mother goes in the garden somewhere. And occasionally she might live 2, 3, 5, 7 years. Who knows? That's a bonus because I couldn't keep it in a container any longer. So, that's how the border along the south front of our house started. I just bunged everything in there that had been in the conservatory that was too big. And you have to do that.
And that border is fantastic. I just
Hmm.
could look at that for hours. There's just so much kind of interweaving. Once it's all romping away, you look up, you look down, you look in, there's just loads.
Yeah, another person might come along, thought this, and think, what an untidy, unholy mess.
For people who don't know it or haven't heard us talk about it before, just name check like a few of the things that make up that wonderful mix.
Well, we have outside the dining room window, we've got a lovely scented Pittosporum tobira variegata. It's got a cream variegation, and I've just, thanks to Ian, sourced one from Langthorne's Plantry, which has golden variegation, and it was called West Acre Gold, and West Acre is a nursery in North Norfolk. And I mean, you may know it. You've been there, I think, haven't you?
I love that nursery. I
Yeah.
wish I lived closer because it's a real trek for me to get to it now. And it's a trek for most people because it's, tucked away in a lovely part of West Norfolk. If you have never been, the best thing about it is not only the fantastic plants, but the fact that a lot of those plants are grown in the walled garden around the nursery and they're labeled. Not everything, but a lot are labeled. So you can go around and see what they're like when they're mature. You can see them, in full flower or whatever they're doing, their habit, what they're planted alongside. It is such a treat.
And they have an amazing range of Primula auriculas. If you go in May and June, you'll see those there too. And Naomi, the girl who grows them there, is an absolute whiz on growing auriculas. And I think, as we know from our mutual friend Jane Ann Walton, you have to have a certain kind of mindset to grow auriculas, really. And I think that mindset is very, very patient and meticulous in the way they carry out, especially the hygiene, because the hygiene in Primula auriculas, especially during the winter time, is enormously important because, fungal rots like botrytis and things can get in and then it can decimate the whole thing.
Mm.
But, having a greenhouse is one of the gardening world's luxuries, I know. But it is absolutely necessary to produce lots of the crops that we grow, whether it be crops of plants that you're going to plant in the garden, you're going to sell, or whatever you're going to do with them. They do need that modicum of heat. And I've got something here which doesn't really look that special, I suppose. But here we are, and we've got this wonderful shrub in flower in the orangery. And it's got these lovely big yellow single flowers, and it's called Reinwardtia indica. That's Rein, Wartia. And I think, actually, I'm looking at the leaves, they've got notches out of them. I hope they haven't got vine weevil in it, but well, if it has, we'll deal with it. But that is a shrub, and it blooms during the winter. I've had it for 3 years, and this is the first year it's really grown properly for me. And that's because I have failed in the previous 2 years to repot it in spring. And that's obviously what it needs. I did it this year. So it's had the whole growing season where it's been looking particularly plumptious. And flowers are so valuable, especially in the dark days of winter. And I mean, something like this is infinitely cheering. I don't think. Oh, yes, there's a very faint scent to it as well, which is rather nice. I say very faint because my sense of smell is not huge. But if Fiona Black was here, she said, I can smell that a mile off.
Fiona Black, county organizer for the National Garden Scheme in Norfolk, for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah,
Those flowers, they've got all the cheerfulness of a primula, that
haven't they?
lovely yellow, happy spring look.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely fabulous. And if you think about it, there's yellow and yellow. Look.
Yeah, and your Narcissus as well. You've got Cedric Morris. There's
Yes,
a real lovely
exactly.
yellow theme
Exactly.
going on.
I always think of yellow as being the color of spring, yellow and blue. I mean, I remember a pairing plant a thing that I saw. It was a very early Narcissus, and I don't know the name of it. It was a fairly dwarf one, and it was undercarpet with blue scillas. And I just thought, oh, look at that combination. That's spring, isn't it? In a teacup, blue and yellow.
Carpets of blue scillas, that's the dream. I aspire to that. I remember visiting one of the stately homes. I can't remember whether it was Lexham Hall in Norfolk, one of them, and just all these little scillas in the grass. And that was probably the first moment I'd ever seen them naturalized like that, and immediately wanting that at some point, in my life.
Well, I've got a Scilla that came from it came on a shovel with permission from Cambridge Botanic Gardens, and I was there one day, and I think we were filming for something or other, and I said, "What is this Scilla?" And it begins with a B. I can't remember it. Do you know it? Bithynica.
Vinica,
Yes,
together now.
Scilla Bithynica. And I said to one of the girls there, I said, "You couldn't spare me a little bit of that, could you?" She said, "You can have as much as you want, but are you sure that you want it?" And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Look." And as far as you could see, there were carpets of it. So I planted it in the woodland garden, and it did exactly what it said on the shovel. It spread around quite a lot. And then we had a lady, a Danish lady, come to work for us in the garden to do some weeding, and she weeded out every single one of them because where she comes from in Denmark, this thing is considered to be a weed. And I couldn't be too cross because she'd done such a lovely job, but inside I was fuming, I was boiling. But anyway, I needn't have worried because there's so many seeds in the soil that they came back, and the following 2 years or 2 years after she did that, they were back and blooming again all over the place. So it was lovely.
Something similar happened to Val Bourne, where she'd spent years cultivating a little colony of Omphalodes or something, or no, Ophiopogon, under
Yeah,
a window, and then her best beloved came along. Oh, I've weeded all that out. Don't worry, it's done, sorted.
I'll give you a case in point. This is another best beloved story. We were walking around the garden the other day, and I said to Graham, "Look at these wonderful self-sown seedlings underneath this Angel's fishing rod, you see?" And he said, "Oh, I've weed killed those." I said, "You what?" They're growing in the path. I
Well,
mean,
yes.
you can't. Well, there you are.
See, I'm inclined to always walk around something that's seeded in a path, unless it's a tree. That might be perhaps a
Yes,
step too far.
yes.
Depends on the
But I
tree.
mean, the one thing about gravel, you see, gravel paths, if they've got or earth underneath them, they are wonderful nursery for seeds, self-sown seeds. And it means you get thistles as well, and nettles, and all the other kind of self-sown seedlings that pop up. But I mean, they can be a wonderful bank for, and you haven't had to do any work. All you've got to do is lift them carefully and pot them singly, grow them on, and there you are. You've got 50 free plants.
Yeah, it's
As you
wonderful.
said, I love a free plant.
I do love a free plant. I have got so much FLOMO from this episode. If you've never listened to one of these, FLOMO is that sense, that fear of missing out you get about a flower or a plant. I get it all the time talking to Alan because, of course, he's got 32 acres full of things to FLOMO over. And I do tend to live my life like it, especially now when I'm not really allowed to do that much gardening or planting. It's interesting. I'm not going to FLOMO over a plant, though I have got a lot of specific plant FLOMO. But what you've really inspired me to do is I am very lucky to have a very small little sink that I did put a couple of choice primulas and things in, which I'm fairly certain have, it's been overrun by weeds and it's nothing to look at all. And I don't think much. I think maybe my Dodecathion, which is actually what Primula media now, I think that survived, but I think pretty much anything else I put in it is gone. It's very small anyway. I'm FLOMOing over the idea of being able to buy one or two choice things because I have a place to put them. If I overhaul it, if I sort it out, I can treat
Yeah.
myself to a couple of little treasures that I can keep in my sink. So that's what I'm going to FLOMO over. The idea that maybe I will have time to do that.
Well, I found last year, I can't think where they came from now, but I found some very choice miniature hardy geraniums. And these are superb plants for a sink. Now, I would caution one thing, don't plant thyme in a sink. I did it, and that's all there is in the sink.
Yeah.
The time has just gone so rapidly, grown so rapidly, and it's overwhelmed everything else. But sink gardening, container gardening, like alpines in sinks or troughs or whatever, once saw in a garden a lovely old, well, I suppose it was a manger originally. It was made of big, thick planks of wood, which were elm, I think. And it had been, it was on legs and it had been in a cow shed for the cows to feed out of. Sloping sides, but it was big. And somebody drilled holes in the bottom of it and they'd filled it full of wonderful gritty soil and it became an alpine bed. And it just looked so stunning. Absolutely marvelous.
Well, you've got
Um,
a lot of very nice alpine troughs. I'll try and find some photos to fling into this podcast for people who haven't been able to walk around all the various different seating areas at East Ruston and all the different glass houses outside. A lot of them, there are sinks and troughs and that wonderful blue rosemary that you have that
yes,
cascades over the side.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I took
Glorious.
cuttings from that there last year, and I used them all around the edge of a big pot in the vegetable garden, and it's weeping down over the edge of that pot fantastically. I just hope it hasn't been too hurt by this frosty weather. It might be a little bit, but then we'd have to just do some judicious pruning and take some more cuttings.
And we all know if there's one thing Alan Gray is extremely good at, it is propagation and taking cuttings. Arguably, maybe too many, but I don't think there is such a thing as too many. Obviously, you're FLOMOing over all kinds of things because you've got your catalogues out, you're sort of
Yeah.
drowning underneath catalogues. And we've already heard about several of the things. Was there anything else you wanted to name drop before we have to wave goodbye?
Well, I haven't even started this one, but this is, I mean, I know that Brian Ellis, Galantholic, is it, on the Instagram? Brian is always showing lovely pictures of some very dwarf bearded iris. And I thought, well, a few of those, now they are quite fleeting. They don't last for a huge length of time. But I think, they're well worth putting in a lovely sunny spot if you've got a sunny spot. And I have, so I can see a few of those coming this way as well. Fascinating. There's always something new, isn't there?
There always is something new. And I learn about so much on this podcast. So although it's always a bit tricky to find time to record, I'm so glad that we managed to have another conversation, because I'm just brimming with ideas and excitement for the gardening I don't get to do. But hey, one day.
One day.
Until next time, thank you very much for joining us, and happy gardening.
All the best, everybody. Bye-bye.
Oh, I like those glasses, by the way. They're very nice.
Do you know what? £2 from Primula.
No.
Yep.
Oh, they're really cool. They look really expensive. I can't say anything with my mic live at the moment, because there's like all kinds of chaos going on in the kitchen, because my mum's arrived and Lily's going crazy, and there's dog greeting.
Do you want to stop?
I think we can carry on because the child's still asleep. So I think once the dog squeaking is now coming back down, I think we can persevere.
That's cyclamen. Sorry, I'll do that again.
Lovely. I can't believe it. We managed to record it before he woke up.
Well,
stayed asleep. It's a miracle. I wish he'd do that at night.
Sleep tonight.